The intake form for Cadet Marin Voss arrived on my terminal at the third bell of the administrative cycle, and I remember thinking, before I had even opened the attachment, that the filing clerk had made some error. The Kethavar Expanse does not take human cadets. That was not a rule written anywhere. It did not need to be. The Expanse takes what the Expanse takes, and what the Expanse takes, the Expanse keeps. In 41 years of administering the trials, I had logged 207 entries. I had logged 207 extractions, psychological break designations, or mortality notices. The ratio was not a secret. Every senior officer in the Interspecies Cooperative Military Exchange knew the ratio. The ICME continued to send cadets because the Kethavar Expanse was the most prestigious trial environment in the outer systems, and prestige has its own gravity. You don't pull cadets out of the pipeline once the prestige gets its hooks in. You send them, you log the outcome, you update the ratio. The ratio had never changed. In 41 years and 207 entries, the denominator and the numerator were the same number. That consistency is not cruelty. The ICME understood what the Expanse was, and they sent cadets anyway, because the ones who came close, the ones who lasted to day 5, day 6, who carved a few hours off the record, came back with data the training programs could not produce any other way. The Expanse broke them, and in breaking them gave the ICME a precise picture of where each species' limits lived. That was the transaction. Everyone understood the terms. You do not, in 41 years, send a human. I opened the attachment. Cadet Marin Voss. Age, 23 standard cycles. Species, human Terran standard. Classification of origin world, Ardenvast class pending cooperative reclassification. The notation in the bracket read class 22 candidate under review. I stopped reading. I pulled up the classification index and searched the Ardenvast entry, and the index returned a single line. Hazardous megafauna density extreme. Atmospheric toxin load variable, seismic instability rating 8.410. Endemic pathogen load high. Average surface temperature range -57 degrees to 64 degrees. Tectonic event frequency in the highest recorded band. And then I stopped reading that too, because the Kethavar Expanse was rated class 14. It had always been rated class 14. In 41 years I had considered that rating a threshold above which nothing rational would volunteer. The species that sent the best cadets, the Veth-Kaari, the Korath seal, the four-armed Dunari academies, peaked at class 9 origin worlds. They sent their finest, and the Expanse returned what the Expanse always returned. I filed the intake paperwork. I want to be accurate about my reasoning at that moment. I did not file it because I expected an anomalous result. I filed it because the ICME authorizes the intake, and I administer the intake, and the word administer means I process what arrives on my terminal, not what I anticipate. That distinction had taken me 3 years to arrive at after I took the administrator post, and I had held it ever since as the thing that let me do this work without it consuming me. The administrator does not carry the cadets home. The Expanse carries them. I make the record. The record is not the same as the weight. I made a note in the intake log: human cadet, origin class 22 candidate, standard 9-day protocol, extraction team on standby from intake. The extraction team was always on standby. I noted the standby. I closed the attachment. I went to my evening rest cycle. I did not sleep well. This is worth recording because it was the first time in 11 years I had not slept well after an intake. In 11 years I had learned not to carry the cadets. That night I lay in my rest pod and the classification notation ran through my mind on a loop, class 22 candidate, under review, and I thought about what that notation meant in practice. The organism that submitted this intake form grew up somewhere that would kill me in less than a day. Grew up there. Was shaped by it. 23 standard cycles of being shaped by it. I did not know what shape that made, and the administrative division had no reference. Nobody in the program had a reference. The ICME had attached a note to the intake form. one-paragraph bureaucratic language, the kind of language that means we are covering ourselves, which said that Cadet Voss had completed all prerequisite ICME physical assessments at or above standard and had been cleared by 3 separate medical review boards and had signed the standard liability waiver, and that the ICME considered this intake consistent with exchange program objectives. The note said nothing about Class 22. It said nothing about what Class 22 means to the organism that survives it to adulthood and then signs a waiver and walks through a gate. I filed the note. I confirmed the extraction team roster. I sent them a supplemental note flagging the cadet species and origin classification and recommending they monitor intake day telemetry with particular attention. The extraction team leader, a Veth-Kaari officer named Soval, 12 years in the program, whom I trusted absolutely in all things, sent back a single line. Understood, Administrator. We'll have her out by nightfall. I marked the reply read. I did not respond. I went to my rest pod. I looked at the ceiling for a long time. Day 1. Cadet Voss entered the Expanse at the 600 gate under standard 9-day protocol. Standard equipment allocation, survival pack, water reclamation unit, personal locator beacon, emergency signal kit, 3 days compressed rations. Standard briefing. No additional guidance is provided. The Expanse is the briefing. She walked through the gate at 6:01. She did not look back. Most cadets look back. The Veth-Kaari cadet from last cycle's cohort had stood in the gateway for 4 full minutes before the entry control officers gestured him through. He had lasted until hour 31 before his beacon activated. Cadet Voss did not look back. She adjusted the pack on her shoulders the way someone adjusts a bag they've been carrying for years. The small, efficient shrug of a person checking that a familiar load is seated correctly, and she walked into the canyon. Telemetry nominal at 900. Telemetry nominal at 1200. At 1400, the atmospheric hazard sensor on her tracker registered a sulfur vent pocket in the section of canyon she was transiting and logged a proximity alert. The standard threshold for proximity alerts in the Expanse is 40 meters, because the vent gases are incapacitating at 40 meters for all cataloged species in the program. The proximity alert logged at 31 meters. The alert logged as unacknowledged. She did not activate her emergency extraction. The sensor recorded her continuing to move. At 1412, the sensor recorded her exiting the vent zone on the far side. Telemetry nominal. At 1800, the extraction team checked in. No extraction requested. Status: ambulatory telemetry stable. I reviewed the vent proximity log 3 times. Unacknowledged is not unusual on its own. Cadets sometimes miss the alert chime or make the decision to push through. What was unusual was that the sensor showed no significant physiological distress response in the post-vent window. Heart rate had elevated to 112 at vent entry, which is what I would expect from any fit cadet pushing through a low-level toxic zone. It returned to 84 within 6 minutes of exit. 84. That was approximately the resting rate the medical intake form had listed for her. She had moved through a sulfur pocket at 9 meters inside the alert threshold, and her body had treated it as a moderate inconvenience. I noted, vent transit without extraction, no anomalous physiological sequelae logged. I sat with that notation for a moment before filing it. Day 2. The Karath scale temperature variance in the Kethavar Expanse runs approximately 22 degrees between the canyon floors and the exposed ridge lines. In the deep canyon systems, the ones first-day cadets almost always avoid because the ridges feel safer, more visible, more controllable. The temperature variance exceeds 30 degrees, and the rockfall index climbs from moderate to severe. Experienced cadets learn, after a day or two of watching the canyon floors, that the ridges are not actually safer. They just feel that way. The open exposure creates an illusion of information. You can see farther, so you believe you are less endangered. Most cadets spend their first day on the ridges. Most extractions happen from ridges. Cadet Voss spent her first night in the canyon floor. The telemetry showed her bivouac position as a sheltered notch at the base of the north face of grid section 7, which is below the frost line at night. The temperature at her position logged at negative 14 degrees Celsius at 200. Standard survival training recommends body temperature management via insulated bivouac material, which she would have had in the pack. Heart rate 58 at 200. 58. She was sleeping. She was moving by 6:30. At 1100 on day 2, the telemetry system lost her. Not lost in the sense of signal degradation. The canyon acoustics occasionally scatter the beacon frequency, and the tech team recalibrates and finds the signal again within the hour. Lost in the sense of, the system logged her entering a section of canyon marked on the administrative maps as grid section 11, subsection omega 4, which is a deep-cut lateral fissure running perpendicular to the main canyon axis. Subsection omega 4 is on the maps because it is a geological feature, and the maps are comprehensive. It does not appear in the standard cadet briefing, because no cadet in the program's history had entered it beyond the first 60 meters, which is approximately where the fissure narrows to a width of 1.4 meters, and the overhead rock closes to less than 2 meters, and the floor drops into a series of unstable shelving that the geological surveys rate as active moderate seismic risk. The system lost her at meter 62. I called the extraction team. They told me they were monitoring. I said the signal is lost. They said they were monitoring with a secondary beacon reader on deploy, a short-range unit that could penetrate the fissure geology, and that they were receiving intermittent position pings consistent with the cadet proceeding further into subsection omega 4. I asked if she had activated an emergency signal. They said no. I said she may not know the risks of proceeding. They said the standard briefing includes a geological hazard summary and that the cadet would have received the summary maps at intake. I said the summary maps describe it as a fissure with limited transit. The extraction team leader said yes. There was a pause. He said, "That's what the map says, administrator." I pulled up the summary map for subsection omega 4. It said, "Fissure geology, limited transit, Class 14 environmental designation applies throughout." It did not say that no cadet had ever come out of this fissure because no cadet had ever gone more than 60 meters into it. It didn't say that because the information had never been relevant before. The map was technically accurate and practically meaningless for the situation. The secondary beacon recovered her position at 1340. She was at meter 312 of subsection omega 4. Telemetry stable, heart rate 91, elevated but not in crisis range. At 1700, the secondary beacon logged her exiting subsection omega 4 from the far terminus, which opens into grid section 14, on the other side of the ridge system from the standard cadet transit routes. The administrative maps designated section 14 as a secondary zone primarily because nobody had ever had cause to navigate to it from the fissure side. She had crossed the ridge system in a day and a half. Most cadets took 4 days. Most cadets who attempted the ridge crossing before day 4 did not complete it, for reasons the extraction logs document in detail. I noted non-standard route subsection omega 4 full transit. Grid section 14 reached day 2, hour 11. Telemetry stable throughout. I pulled up the record for the fastest previous ridge crossing. Day 4, hour 3. A Koreth SEAL cadet from cohort 31. He had been extracted on day 5 with a severe toxin exposure from the desert plateau on the section 14 side. I noted the section 14 plateau hazard profile and flagged it for day 3 monitoring. I noted it and then I sat at my terminal for a while after the day 2 log was filed, doing nothing in particular, just sitting. Day 3. Cadets break on day 3 more than any other day. I have analyzed the extraction data across 41 years, and the day 3 concentration is consistent across species, cohort size, origin world rating, and physical fitness classification. the operating hypothesis, supported by the ICME's Behavioral Science Division, whose reports I have read and filed for 11 years, is that day 3 is when the body's initial adrenaline response has exhausted itself, and the cognitive load of sustained threat awareness begins to outpace the organism's capacity to manage it. Day 1 is fear. Day 2 is the determination that answers the fear. Day 3 is the gap between what the organism believed it could endure and what endurance actually costs. In 41 years, no cadet had ever requested extraction on day 3 and then re-entered the Expanse. Once the beacon fires, the protocol is clear. The trial is over. Most cadets, when Korath clears them in the medical station, look relieved. A few are ashamed. The shame passes. The protocol exists because the Behavioral Science Division has documented what happens to organisms that re-enter after a break event, and what happens is not good. Cadet Voss did not fire her beacon on day 3. What she did on day 3 was more difficult to log than a beacon activation. At 400 before my own rest cycle had completed, the monitoring station flagged an environmental event in grid section 14. A thermal upwelling from the subsurface geology, which the hazard profile notes as periodic and unpredictable, had generated a localized superheating event. The monitoring station's thermal sensors logged the ambient temperature at Cadet Voss's position, rising from 24 degrees Celsius to 61 degrees over a period of 40 minutes. 61 degrees Celsius. That is above the survivability threshold for every species enrolled in the ICME program. The survivability threshold means exactly what it sounds like. At that temperature, sustained exposure kills. The hazard duration estimate from the monitoring station's geological model was 2 to 4 hours. The cadet's emergency signal did not activate. I was at my terminal before the day 3 log cycle had officially opened. I was on the extraction team channel at 4:45. Soval, 12 years, the man I trusted, told me the thermal sensor readings were consistent with a survivability event, but that the cadet's personal telemetry showed a heart rate of 104 and a core temperature of 37.8 degrees, within the normal range for a Terran human under thermal stress, and that she appeared to be sheltering in a section of the plateau where the rock overhang creates a shaded microclimate that attenuated the upwelling. She had found the one feature of Section 14 that attenuated it. I asked if he was certain. He said he was reading the telemetry directly. He said the cadet appeared to be resting in the shade. Resting. I wrote the word in my log and looked at it for a moment without typing anything else. At 900, the thermal upwelling subsided. Monitoring logged the ambient temperature returning to 26 degrees. Cadet Voss's telemetry logged her moving again at 9:17. 13 minutes after the environment became compatible with movement, she was moving. I made a note in the day 3 log. Thermal upwelling event, section 14, duration 4 hours and 11 minutes, ambient temperature peak 63 degrees Celsius. Cadet sheltered under rock overhang. Extraction not requested. Telemetry stable throughout. Then I sat and looked at the note. At the end of day 3, I pulled up the full cohort roster. 3 cadets had entered the Expanse this cycle. A Dunari cadet, 4-armed scholarly elite academy, considered among the finest candidates the Dunari had sent in a decade, had activated his beacon at hour 17 of day 3. A Veth-Kaari cadet had activated at hour 22. Both were in the recovery unit at intake, physiologically intact, psychological break designation logged, standard assessment outcomes. The 3rd cadet's telemetry read. Grid section 14, heart rate 67, bivouac established, 2100 hours. Sleeping. Day 4. I will admit something here that I would not ordinarily include in an administrative log, but I have been administrator of this program for 11 years, and the log is the record of what happened. And what happened on day 4 includes a change in me that is as relevant to the record as the telemetry data. So I will include it. I began day 4 with a feeling I can only describe as recalibration. Not excitement, not dread exactly. Something closer to the sensation I imagine a geological surveyor experiences when the instrument reading does not match the model, when the surveyor has to decide whether the instrument is malfunctioning or the model is wrong. I had made the decision, provisionally, that the model might be wrong. I was beginning to think about what kind of wrong. The day 4 logs run to 11 pages. I will note the relevant entries. Cadet Voss moved from grid section 14 across the secondary canyon system into the open desert plateau of grid section 18. Section 18 is where the Expanse's megafauna density peaks. The administrative briefing for section 18 lists 16 documented species, of which 11 are rated apex-level predatory, and of which 3 are classified as territorial and aggressive in the body mass range that encompasses all enrolled cadet species. Section 18 is not a prohibited zone. Prohibited zones would undermine the purpose of the Expanse. But Section 18 is where advanced cadets go in the final days when attempting a full-circuit completion, which requires passing through all 22 designated grid sections before the beacon fires or the 9-day window closes. No cadet had ever completed a full circuit. The record completion was grid sections 1 through 17, logged by a Koreth SEAL cadet in cohort 14 on day 8, before an injury-forced extraction in section 17. He is considered the finest cadet the program has ever processed. His record had stood for 22 years, and I had never expected to have cause to update it. Cadet Voss entered section 18 on day 4, hour 6. She was 2.5 days ahead of any prior cadet's position at this point in the trial. I had no framework for monitoring what came next. I was building the framework as I went. At hour 9, the megafauna proximity sensor logged a contact, Heathrack, the territorial species rated most dangerous in the section, averaging 400 kilograms, documented in 3 kill events in program history. Distance, 60 meters. The sensor logged the contact stationary. I pulled the monitoring station's directional feed. The Heathrack was in a full territorial display posture, lateral presentation, vocalizing, ground strike behavior, approach deferred. Approach deferred means it had not charged yet. In the field biology notes in the program database, approach deferred precedes charge in approximately 80% of documented contacts. The remaining 20% conclude with the Heathrack withdrawing if the target does not engage return behavior. Cadet Voss's telemetry, heart rate 88, the same as it had been before the contact registered. The sensor logged the contact duration at 11 minutes. I watched the directional feed for all 11 of them. The Heathrack held its display. The cadet did not move. Not in the sense of holding still out of fear. The telemetry showed no significant physiological escalation, but in the sense of someone who has made a considered decision to be motionless and is executing that decision with complete steadiness. At the end of 11 minutes, the Heathrack's posture changed. The field biology notes classify the change as territorial display conclusion withdrawal. The Heathrack turned. It moved away from the cadet's position. I do not have a notation for that outcome in the Expanse's incident response database. The database has charge, injury, extraction. The database has cadet withdrawal, extraction. The database has no subcategory for predator withdrawal, cadet stationary, no incident. I added one. I labeled it non-event, predator disengagement, cadet stationary. I am aware this is unusual administrative behavior. I logged it anyway because in 41 years I have always logged what happened. Heart rate 88. She had been at 88 before the contact, and she returned to 83 afterward. 7 minutes later she was moving again, continuing the section 18 transit. 2 more Heathrack contacts logged on day 4, hour 11 and hour 14. The hour 11 contact was a different individual. The sensor logged it at a distance of 44 meters, closer than the first, and the approach behavior was more aggressive. This one charged. I am going to be precise about what the telemetry showed because I have read it many times and I want the record to be accurate. The heath rack closed from 44 meters to 22 meters before it stopped. That is a charge that stops at 22 meters, which is not in the field biology notes as a documented behavioral category. The notes describe charges as either completing to contact or aborting at 50 meters or greater when the target exhibits escape behavior. At 22 meters, the sensor logged the heath rack's movement as stopped, stationary, duration 90 seconds, withdrawal. Cadet Voss's heart rate at the moment the charge stopped, 96. During the 90-second stationary period, 94. At the point of withdrawal, 91. I have no notation category for this either. I created one. Predator charge abort at close range, cadet stationary, no escape behavior, no incident. I filed it next to the first heath rack entry in the non-event subcategory. I noted that I did not know what she had done in those 90 seconds. The visual feed angle from that grid coordinate showed the heath rack but not the cadet clearly. I could see that she had not moved significantly. Whatever communication passed between them at 22 meters in 90 seconds, it was not recorded in any data channel I was monitoring. The hour 14 contact was brief, 3 minutes, disengagement without escalation. The database note I wrote for it was one line, third heath rack contact, section 18, disengaged, standard entry appended. I looked at the word standard entry appended for a moment. Nothing about the previous 4 days had been standard. I filed it anyway because standard was the only language the system had. At the end of day 4, I reviewed the monitoring station's visual feed logs from the full section 18 transit. The feed quality in the open plateau is better than the canyon sections, less interference, wider angles. I watched nearly an hour of footage across the A-Tower transit. She moved through section 18 the way someone moves through terrain they have assessed and found manageable, not cautious the way Veth-Kaari cadets were cautious, which was the managed fear caution of an organism controlling its own instinct to run, but something different, something that looked more like familiarity. As if section 18 were a known type of landscape and she were applying a practiced method, the same method she had applied to the canyon floors on day 1 and the fissure on day 2 and the shade rock on day 3. Assessing the available information, making decisions, moving on them. I wrote in my private notes, reads the landscape, crossed that out, rewrote it as, subject demonstrated continuous environmental assessment consistent with advanced threat awareness training. I knew that was not what it was. I left the bureaucratic language because I had no better language for what I was watching. The language I had would have required a different kind of file. I filed day 4 and went to my rest cycle. I slept for 3 hours, which was an improvement. Day 5. I called the ICME Behavioral Science Division at the start of day 5. In 11 years I had done this twice, both times for crisis protocol situations involving mortality events. I told the division officer that I was monitoring a cadet who had reached day 5 without extraction, transited non-standard route geometry, survived an extreme thermal event, and logged 3 megafauna contacts without incident, and that I was filing an anomaly report and requesting guidance on monitoring protocol. The division officer asked which species. I told him. There was a pause on the line. I have administered enough communications in 41 years to know the difference between a processing pause and a surprised pause. That was surprised. He said he would need to consult with the Exchange Oversight Committee and would return my call within the day. I said I would be at my terminal. He said he understood. Standard monitoring protocol. I returned to the terminal. Section 19 is the high-altitude canyon system along the northern edge of the plateau. 2 features relevant to this log. The first is altitude, 3,400 meters above the canyon datum, where the atmospheric pressure drops to approximately 0.74 standard, and the oxygen partial pressure requires acclimatization protocols for all enrolled species. The standard acclimatization recommendation in the ICME briefing is ascend no more than 600 meters per day above 2,000 meters and rest no less than 4 hours at each intermediate altitude. That recommendation was developed by the medical division after 3 extraction events involving altitude-related cognitive impairment in otherwise capable cadets. Cadet Voss ascended from 1,800 meters to 3,400 meters in day 5. She did not stop at intermediate altitudes. The telemetry showed no significant cognitive impairment indicators. Heart rate tracked the elevation gain. Oxygen saturation proxy data logged a sustained dip between 2,600 and 3,100 meters, and then a recovery, which is consistent with a rapid acclimatization response that the medical divisions notes rate as unusual but not impossible in high-fitness organisms. She was at 3,400 meters by hour 12. The second feature of Section 19 is weather. The canyon geometry channels the plateau's thermal differential into sustained wind events that the meteorological station rates as severe above 3,000 meters. On day 5, the monitoring station logged wind speeds at the Section 19 ridgeline at 61 kilometers per hour, gusting to 90. I have the meteorological log for that hour. The gust peaks are documented at 92 kilometers per hour. At that wind speed, the monitoring station's own anemometer array requires anchoring. The cadet's telemetry showed her at the ridgeline at hour 14. Heart rate 119, the highest I had logged for her across the entire trial. She stopped for 40 minutes. Not in an emergency bivouac configuration. The telemetry showed her positioned against a windward rock face, sheltered but not fully bivouacked. The distinction matters because a full emergency bivouac is a distress indicator. It means the cadet is managing a crisis. A partial shelter against a rock face is a rest position. She was not in crisis. She was resting in 90 km/h gusts on a ridgeline at 3,400 meters, and in 40 minutes her heart rate had returned from 119 to 101, and then she was moving again, descending into the interior slope of Section 19 toward grid Section 20. Heart rate 94 by the time she reached the descent grade. I noted the altitude ascent rate. I noted the wind event duration. I noted the partial shelter rest. I noted that she had not requested extraction during any of it. I filed each notation, and then I sat for a moment looking at the column of day 5 entries growing on the log. 7 years into my posting as administrator, I had requested a consultation with the ICME's Program Design Division about whether the Expanse's 9-day window was too generous, whether the parameters had been set conservatively relative to what cadets could actually endure, and whether the window should be shortened to maintain trial integrity. The Program Design Division had told me the window was calibrated to the upper survival limits of the enrolled species, and that the generous window accounted for variance in cadet capability. They had said, "The Expanse is not too generous. The Expanse is about right." I thought about that consultation on the evening of day 5. I thought about what the Program Design Division had meant by upper survival limits and what they had been thinking about when they calculated it. I thought about what they had not been thinking about. The behavioral science officer called back at hour 16 of day 5. He told me the oversight committee had reviewed the file and recommended that monitoring continue under standard protocol, and that if the cadet reached day 7 without extraction, the committee would convene a formal review. He said this in the careful tone of an officer delivering information that the committee does not know how to frame, which I had heard twice before, during those 2 crisis events, and which I recognized immediately. Day 7. The committee expected, without stating the expectation, that she would not reach day 7. I thanked him for the call. I returned to the terminal. I noted the call in the day 5 log. I looked at the notation for a moment, then added, "Committee review threshold set at day 7. I noted it without further comment and filed the day. Day 6. Section 20 is fog. Dense, saturating fog generated by the thermal differential between the high-altitude canyon walls and the lowland basin at the section's floor. The visibility sensor data for the standard fog period logs approximately 4 meters. 4 meters in terrain with a rockfall index rated high and a surface water feature. A series of flash flood channels running through the basin that the hydrology notes describe as unpredictable in activation timing. The channels don't flood on a schedule. They flood on a thermal differential. You cannot predict the differential without monitoring equipment. She entered Section 20 at the start of Day 6. I was at my terminal before the Day 6 log cycle opened. She moved through Section 20 fog for 9 hours. I have reviewed the telemetry record from those 9 hours more times than I have reviewed any other record in 11 years as administrator, and I have reviewed it because I do not fully understand it. The path she took through Section 20, when I overlaid it on the hydrological mapping for the flash flood channels, traced a route that avoided every primary channel activation zone, not by wide margins. The closest pass was 14 meters from a channel that activated at hour 3 of Day 6. The hydrology monitoring logged a 3-meter surge event in that channel at that time. 14 meters, at 4 meters of visibility. The monitoring station has no model for how she found the path. The fog precluded any visual feed analysis. I consulted the hydrology division's records for the Section 20 channel network and found that the channels produce a subsurface acoustic signature when they activate, a low-frequency ground resonance that precedes the surge by approximately 6 to 12 seconds. The Cadet's telemetry does not include an acoustic sensor channel. I do not know if she was navigating on that acoustic signature. I do not have another explanation. I entered in the log, non-standard route navigation in restricted visibility conditions, Section 20, full transit, no incident. I added a note, hydrology event correlation requires further analysis. Consultation requested with monitoring station geological team. I filed the consultation request. The geological team came back to me 6 hours later, while the cadet was still in Section 21, with a 2-paragraph response that I have read enough times to reproduce from memory. The first paragraph said, "The Section 20 channel network does produce low-frequency ground resonance preceding surge events, in the range of 1832 Hz, amplitude varying by channel and substrate. The resonance precedes visible surge by approximately 6 to 14 seconds depending on the channel." The second paragraph said, "This signature is below the conscious hearing threshold for all species enrolled in the ICME program. It is theoretically detectable as a tactile vibration through foot contact with the substrate, but the monitoring station has never flagged it as a navigation aid because no cadet has ever required navigation in those conditions at that visibility range. Below the conscious hearing threshold for all enrolled species." I read that line several times. I filed the geological team's response in the Day 6 supplemental log. I noted it without further comment because the comment I wanted to make was not administrative language and I could not find a way to make it so. The comment was, "She felt it through her boots, 9 days into a Class 14 world." She was navigating on a signal we do not have a sensor channel for, that we have never needed a sensor channel for, that no organism in 208 program entries would have been capable of detecting. She felt it and she trusted it, and after the 3rd time she confirmed it, she stopped second-guessing it and moved. I did not write that comment. I filed the geological team's response and moved to the Day 6 closing summary. At hour 11 of Day 6, she exited Section 20 and entered Grid Section 21, the last section before the terminal canyon. Section 21 is open ground, flat, exposed, no significant natural features. The ICME's course designers apparently considered it a transition zone, a walkthrough between the Section 20 fog system and the Terminal Canyon. In 41 years of program records, Section 21 had generated 0 extraction events. Cadets who reached it were either in controlled crisis, depleted, injury-compromised, running on reserve, or they were not there at all. Cadet Voss reached Section 21 on Day 6, Hour 11. Telemetry, heart rate 97, core temperature 38.1 degrees Celsius. The temperature was the low end of febrile range for Terran humans. I flagged it. I pulled the medical reference for Terran fever response and read it carefully. The reference said, mild elevation consistent with sustained physical exertion and/or immune response to environmental pathogen exposure. It said, not clinically significant unless sustained above 39.5 degrees. I noted the temperature flag. I noted the reference guidance. I closed the reference file and sat for a moment. She bivouacked in Section 21 at nightfall, Hour 16 of Day 6. Heart rate 61, sleeping again. The Oversight Committee called at the end of Day 6. The officer I spoke with was a grade level above my usual behavioral science contact, the committee coordinator, a position I had spoken with twice in 11 years. He said the committee had reviewed the daily logs and wanted to be updated at each morning bell. He said they were aware this was anomalous and that they had confirmed there was no precedent in the program's history for a cadet reaching Day 7, and that they were not prepared to state a position on expected outcome. He said they were watching. I thanked him and ended the call. I went to my rest pod. I did not look at the ceiling for as long as I had on Day 1. I understood now, at the end of Day 6, that the instrument was going to reach the end of its range before the cadet did, and that the question I had been holding, what shape does a Class 22 world make, was being answered in front of me in 11 pages of telemetry logs, and the answer was not something I could summarize in administrative language. The answer was someone who found the only shade in a 60-degree thermal event and rested in it. Someone who navigated 4-meter visibility terrain on a subsurface acoustic signature she apparently learned to trust by the 3rd channel. Someone who stood still for 11 minutes while a 400-kilogram territorial predator decided what to do and then walked away. The answer was, a shape the Expanse was not built to contain. Day 7. I have been trying in these logs to remain administrative. The administrator does not attach to outcomes. I have held that for 41 years and I intend to continue holding it. But Day 7 is the day I stopped being certain that what I was administering was a trial. The Kethavar Expanse is a trial in the technical sense, a structured assessment environment with defined parameters, known hazard configurations, monitored telemetry, and an extraction protocol. It was designed to test the upper limits of candidate species field survival capability. The intent was not to kill cadets. The intent was to find the limit, the line beyond which the organism breaks, and to use that data to calibrate training programs, equipment standards, and deployment profiles across the cooperative's military exchange framework. Every cadet who enters the Expanse hits the line. That is the purpose. Find the line. On Day 7, I was no longer certain that the line existed in the range the Expanse was built to find. She moved through grid section 21 and entered the Terminal Canyon approach at Hour 2 of Day 7. Section 22 is a 4-kilometer canyon transit to the exit gate. Its hazard rating is Class 8, well below the Section 18 and Section 19 ratings. The course designers 41 years ago had intended it to be completable, a terminal approach that any cadet who reached it, however depleted, could navigate. In practice, no cadet had ever reached it intact enough to test that assumption. Cadet Voss entered Section 22 at Hour 2 of Day 7. Her heart rate was 103. Her core temperature had returned to 37.6 degrees overnight. The fever, such as it was, had resolved. She was moving at a pace the monitoring station's movement analysis system logged as slightly below her average transit rate for the trial, which the system attributed to accumulated fatigue load, slightly below average, after 7 days, on a Class 14 world. After the thermal event, and the fog, and the altitude climb, and the Heathwreck contacts, she completed the 4-kilometer transit in 3 hours and 2 minutes. She walked through the exit gate at hour 5 and 4 minutes of day 7. I want to be precise about this moment, because in 11 years as administrator, I have never had cause to be precise about this moment, the moment of circuit completion. And I find that I want the record to be exact. The exit gate is a physical gate at the far end of the terminal canyon, a steel frame structure with a coded lock, installed 41 years ago when the Expanse was designated as a trial environment, checked for function 3 times per year as part of standard maintenance. The function check is 3 lines in the annual maintenance log: gate frame, structural integrity pass, coded lock mechanism, functional, hinge resistance within tolerance pass. In 41 years and 208 entries, those 3 lines were the gate's entire history. It was a door at the end of a corridor that nobody had ever reached the beginning of in condition to walk all the way through. The checkbox was the purpose of the checkbox. Nobody had ever expected it to be more. The monitoring station logged: exit event grid section 22 terminal gate. Cadet Voss Marin, Terran Human, day 7, hour 5 and 4 minutes. I was at my terminal. I looked at the log line. I was not being administrative. The exit gate opens into the post-trial processing corridor, a short row of low buildings between the Expanse perimeter and the intake facility, with medical assessment stations, debrief rooms, equipment return. The monitoring station in the processing corridor has a visual feed I had never checked before in 11 years because there had been no reason to. I pulled it. She was standing at the corridor entrance, pack still on her back, both straps. She was looking at the facility buildings with the same quality of attention I had watched her give the Section 18 plateau, not scanning anxiously, not relieved in the way the Day 3 cadets look relieved when they reach the processing area after extraction, reading the layout, deciding her route. Her clothing was abraded in several places. The insulating material of her equipment vest had partially degraded in the Section 14 thermal event. The monitoring station had flagged this on day 3, and she had continued using the vest because it still provided partial function, and the partial function had been enough. There was a cut along her left jaw that had been sealed with a strip of field dressing from the pack. Her boots were caked with Section 20 sediment that had not fully dried. She looked at the buildings. She adjusted the pack strap, the same small, efficient shrug she had made walking through the intake gate 7 days earlier. She walked toward the medical station. I closed the feed. I opened my incident log for the day 7 entry. I sat for a moment before I typed. I typed, grid section 22, terminal transit complete. Subject exited via exit gate at day 7, hour 5 and 4 minutes. Full circuit grid sections 1 through 22. No extraction event. No beacon activation. No psychological break event logged. No mortality event. No precedent in program history. I sat for another moment. I added, recommend standing committee review of Kethavar Expanse assessment parameters and applicability of current trial calibration framework to Class 22 Origin World candidates. I filed it. I closed the terminal. I went to the medical station. She was sitting on the low bench outside the assessment room when I arrived. Korath, the Veth-Kaari medical officer, 8 years working alongside me, was standing in the doorway with his assessment tablet and an expression I had never seen on him in 8 years. He looked at me when I walked in and said very quietly, "The core temperature is 38.2, and she declined the analgesic because she said it wasn't that bad." It wasn't that bad. I looked at Korath. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I walked to the bench. Marin Voss looked up. She was, up close, what she had been in the intake photograph, young, Ordinary featured brown hair and a short cut that had become significantly less tidy over 7 days, smaller than the standard dimensions for Veth-Kaari cadets, which always struck me as a data point that the intake photograph did not adequately contextualize. There was a line of sunburn across her nose. The field dressing on her jaw was holding cleanly. She looked tired in the way someone looks tired after a long day that was harder than expected. Not the specific exhaustion I knew from 11 years of reading break event cadets, which has a quality of hollowing that the body carries in a particular way. She looked at me, she said, "Are you the administrator?" I said I was. She said, "I saw the exit gate wasn't staffed. I wasn't sure if I needed to check in somewhere specific." I said the gate had a passive sensor that logged the transit event, and that the check-in here was sufficient. She nodded the way someone nods when an answer confirms what they had already assumed. She said, "When does the next cohort ship?" I said, "The next cohort intake cycle opens in 31 days. She looked at me steadily and said, "I'd like to be considered for the advanced track if there is one." I said, "There is no advanced track." She said, "Then is there a second run?" Koreth made a sound. I don't have a clinical category for the sound. I said to Cadet Voss that to my knowledge no cadet had submitted a second run request, and that I would need to consult with the oversight committee before I could give her an answer. She nodded. She paused and then said, "The Section 20 fog was the hardest part. The channels activate on a thermal differential. You can hear it before you can see the surge, but the lag is short. Maybe 8 seconds. The first 2 times I thought I was reading it wrong because the sound is low frequency, and you're not sure if you're hearing it or feeling it. After the 3rd time I stopped doubting it." I said, "You were not reading it wrong." She said, "I know. That's what I mean. I kept thinking I was, but the data kept being correct. So after the 3rd time I stopped second-guessing the read and just moved on what I had." After the 3rd time, she had worked out a methodology for navigating 4-meter visibility terrain over a hydrology system she had never encountered before in approximately 2 hours through iterative confirmation of a low-frequency acoustic signal, and then executed the methodology without further deviation for the remaining 7 hours of the Section 20 transit. I said, "I will note your second run request in the administrative file and bring it to the committee. Koreth will complete your medical assessment. He'll want you to stay in the medical facility overnight." She said, "I understand." She paused again. She said, "Thank you, Administrator." I walked back to the administrative building. I sat at my terminal. I pulled up the incident log for day 7 and looked at what I had written. Full circuit. No precedent in program history. I looked at it for a long time. The oversight committee called 17 minutes after I returned to my desk. The committee coordinator said they had reviewed the exit event log and were convening a full review and would need my complete administrative record for the cycle. I said I would send it. He said the committee was, and here he paused in the way I recognized as the pause of someone choosing words with unusual care. The committee was reevaluating the program's classification framework in light of the outcome, and that they would be in contact about the assessment parameter review I had recommended. I said I appreciated the committee's attention. He paused again. Then he said, "Administrator Ossel Thun, in 41 years of program records, has this happened before?" I said no. He said, "And in your professional assessment, given your experience, what does this outcome tell us?" I thought about the hydrology map and the 14-meter margin in 4-meter visibility. I thought about 83 beats per minute after the Heathrack withdrew. I thought about 38 degrees core temperature in a 63-degree thermal environment. I thought about the pack strap adjustment at the intake gate and the same adjustment at the exit gate, 7 days and 22 grid sections apart, the same small, efficient shrug. I said, "The Expanse was built to find a line. We found instead that for some organisms, the line is somewhere the Expanse cannot reach." The coordinator was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would pass that along to the review committee. I thanked him. I ended the call. Day 8 and Day 9 are in the standard post-trial log as recovery and debrief. The medical record, filed separately under Cadet Voss's ICME personnel record, notes, mild febrile response resolved within 18 hours of exit. Dermal abrasion, multiple sites, no intervention required. Laceration, left mandibular region, field dressed, closed without suture. Elevated inflammatory markers consistent with sustained physical exertion. No cognitive impairment. No psychological break indicators on the ICME's standard trauma response battery. The psychology officer administered the full battery on Day 8. He came to my office afterward and sat down without being invited and said, "I need to ask you something." I said, "Go ahead." He said, "The trauma response scores are not just within normal range. They are below the median for cadets who complete standard assessments without having been in the expanse at all. She is calmer after 9 days in a Class 14 environment than most cadets are after a routine fitness evaluation." I said, "Yes." He said, "Is that," and here he stopped and tried again, "is that a human thing?" I said, "I don't know enough to say with certainty, but I would not be surprised." He sat for a moment. He said, "I looked up the Origin World classification, the Ardenvast entry in the ICME database." I said I had read the notation. He said I read the whole entry, the megafauna density section, the atmospheric toxin data, the average temperature range. I waited. He said, and then I sat very still for a while. I said, "Yes, so did I." He left. I returned to my terminal. At 900 on Day 9, the monitoring station logged Cadet Voss entering the administrative building. At 9:06 she knocked on my office door. I said, "Come in." She sat in the intake chair, the same chair she had sat in 9 days earlier for the pre-entry briefing, and she looked at me and she said, "I've thought about what you said, about the second run. I understand there's no precedent." I said there wasn't. She said, "But is there a rule against it?" I looked at her. I looked at the intake form open on my terminal. Field 34 of the intake form is labeled Psychological Break Event and has a date entry format for logging the timestamp of the break activation. In 208 program entries, I count this one. The count is now 208. I have never once left that field blank. I said, "Cadet Voss, in 41 years of this program, the rule against a second run was never written because the situation never arose." She nodded slowly. She said, "So it's not prohibited?" I said, "It is not prohibited." She said, "Then I'd like to request it formally." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "I will file the request with the Oversight Committee. I recommend strongly that you take the 31 days before the next intake cycle and allow the medical division to complete a full longitudinal assessment. Korath's team has not run the full environmental pathogen panel yet." She said, "I can do that." I said, "The committee may deny the request." She said, "I understand." I said, "And if they approve it, the 9-day protocol will apply again. No modifications, the same expanse." She looked at me, not challenging, not uncertain. She said, "I know." I made a note on my terminal slowly because I wanted the language to be correct. I wrote, "Cadet Voss, Marin, Terran Human, Class 22 Origin. Second run request formally submitted, Day 9, 9:08. Request filed to Oversight Committee for review." I looked at the note. I looked at her. I said, "I will tell you something, Cadet, that I have never told anyone who sat in that chair, in 41 years of this program." She waited. That particular quality of waiting, attentive, unhurried, reading the situation that I had been watching in the telemetry for 9 days. I said, "The Expanse was built to find limits. In 41 years it has found them. Every time. The instrument has been reliable because everything we put through it had a limit inside its range. That is what the Expanse is for. She said, and I said, and the committee is going to ask me, they have already asked me, what this outcome tells us. The answer I gave them was honest, but it was not complete. The complete answer is this: the instrument found nothing, not because it malfunctioned, because what we sent through it grew up somewhere the instrument was never calibrated for. We built the Expanse to be the hardest thing we knew. We did not know what hard means where you come from. She was quiet. She looked at the window for a moment, at the Expanse perimeter visible through the glass, the canyon mouth, the first ridge line, the beginning of Section 2 just visible in the morning light. Then she looked back at me. She said, it was hard. I don't want you to think it wasn't. I said, I know it was hard. I watched it. She said, the fog was the hardest. And the thermal event on day 3, I knew the rock would hold the shade, but I wasn't certain how long the event would last, and I had no way to know if I had enough water to wait it out if it ran longer than it did. I was on my 3rd reclamation cycle by the time the temperature dropped. She stopped. She said, I started rationing from hour 1 of the event. I wasn't worried about it exactly. I just didn't know the geology well enough to estimate the event duration. So I treated it like I'd be there for 2 days and worked backward from that. Treat it like you'd be there for 2 days and work backward from that. I wrote that in my private notes after she left, not the administrative log. The private notes, which are not filed with the program records. I wrote it because it is the clearest description I have encountered in 41 years of what the difference looks like. The difference between an organism managing a survivability event and an organism that has been managing survivability events long enough that the management is no longer a response. It is a posture. It is the default. I said it translated. She said it translated. She looked at her hands for a moment. She said, that was good to know. I looked at her. I said, when the committee decides on the 2nd run request, I will contact you directly. She said, thank you. She stood. She adjusted the strap on the ordinary bag she had brought to the meeting, not the pack, an everyday bag, the kind anyone would carry. She looked at my terminal for a moment without reading it, the way people look at a screen when they are thinking about something else. Then she looked at me. She said, I'll be in the medical facility if you need to reach me before the committee decides. I said I would. She walked out. I sat at my terminal. I sat for a while without doing anything, which is not administrative behavior and which I noted to myself without particularly caring. Then I turned to the intake form for Cadet Marin Voss, Terran Human, Class 22 Candidate Origin. 208th entry in 41 years of program records. I looked at field 34, the date entry field, blank. I saved the file. I did not fill it in.